IAS 38, Intangible Assets. The standard outlines the accounting requirement for intangible assets, which are non-monetary assets without any physical substance. We've heard a lot about intangible assets, goodwill, brand, and all of those things. So this standard is there to provide guidance on the recognition and measurement of intangible assets. Okay.
Sure.
So, like I have always said, almost every standard will follow a certain pattern. We define some terms, then there's the recognition, and there's the measurement, which can be initial and subsequent, and
Okay.
some disclosure requirements. So let's look at the objective of IAS 38. The standard prescribes the accounting treatment for intangible assets that are not dealt with specifically in another IFRS. The standard requires an entity to recognize an intangible asset if and only if certain criteria are met. The standard also specifies how to measure the carrying amount of intangible assets and requires certain disclosures regarding intangible assets. So the discussion will be in line with this. We'll talk about the recognition, the measurement, and disclosure.
Okay.
Let's look at some key definitions. Intangible assets. So they are identifiable, non-monetary assets without physical substance. Unlike other assets which are tangible, machinery, vehicle, building, these ones are assets, but they are non-monetary and they don't have any physical substance. So I can say they exist on paper, but we can't pinpoint that, oh, this is the intangible assets in question. And because they are assets, it is controlled by the entity. As a result of past events, like all assets. And we expect that future economic benefits will flow to the entity. So this is intangible assets.
Okay.
So because of that, we have 3 critical attributes of an intangible asset from this definition. The first is that it has to be identifiable.
Identifiable. Okay.
And it must be controlled by the entity.
Future
And then
economic.
future economic benefit. Where is that? Yeah,
Yeah.
to flow to the entity. And this future economic benefit can be in the form of revenue or reduced cost. Then, if we control something,
Mm-hmm.
we have the power to obtain the benefit. All right. So these are the three attributes of an intangible asset. It has to be identifiable. It must be controlled by the entity, and we expect future economic benefits to flow to the entity. Right. With that said, let's look at identifiability. Identifiability. We said it is a non-monetary asset which is identifiable. So how do we define identifiability? All right. An intangible asset is identifiable when it is separable. That is the first thing. Separable. And it arises from contractual or legal rights. What do we mean by it being separable? It is capable of being separated and sold. So this means that it is capable of being separated and sold. That is one. Transferred. That is two. Licensed. Three. Rented or exchanged. This is what it means by it being separable. It
Okay.
is capable of being separated and sold, capable of being transferred. So you can transfer the intangible to another entity or person. You can license it, license the intangible. So we can talk about the KFC franchise.
Yeah.
KFC is just a name,
Mm-hmm.
and we have people going for the franchise, going for the name to do business. You can mention Guel, because initially I thought all the Guel filling stations were for the government until I got to know that some are private. They just sell using the name.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So that is some form of intangible. Yeah. And you can also as well rent or exchange it. So this is what we mean by it being separable.
Okay.
And it must arise from contractual or legal rights. So if as a result of a contract, I can use the intangible. My right to the intangible is arising because of the contract,
Okay.
or the law can give someone the right to an intangible, and that is the legal right. Yeah, are we okay?
Yes, please.
All right. We move on with how we can acquire intangibles. So, an intangible can be acquired by separate purchase, by purchase. So, we buy it as part of a business combination, consolidation is there. Because if we should go and acquire another entity and that entity has an intangible, obviously it
Mm-hmm.
becomes part of the business combination.
Sure.
You can also get it by a government grant. And please, Ike, can you check your mic? I think there's some noise,
Uh,
a hissing
yeah, it's
noise,
actually raining.
a
It's actually
hissing.
raining here.
Ah, it's raining.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, fine. All right. It can also be acquired by a government grant, by exchange of assets. Oh, you are very lucky to see rain. We haven't had any rain here still yet.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while it's rained here, so
By exchange of assets, by self creation, that is internally generated. So these are some of the ways an intangible can be acquired. Either you buy it, you acquire the intangible as part of a business combination, by a government grant, by exchange of assets, or self creation, which is the
okay.
internally generated intangible assets.
Okay.
Now, let's look at the recognition. An intangible is an asset. So, the same recognition criteria of an asset,
Mm-hmm.
which is two,
Probably.
if it is probable,
Future economic
future
benefits will
economic,
flow into the
yeah,
reliably measured.
will flow to us, to the entity, and then reliably measured. Good. We won't spend much time on this.
Okay.
We've already spoken about the ways we can acquire the intangibles,
Sure.
which is through a purchase as part of a business combination and by exchange of assets and all those things. So let's look at
Sure.
some examples of intangible assets. Examples can talk about patented technology, computer software, database, and then trade secrets. We can also mention trademarks, licensing agreements, franchise agreement, like the KFC franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Marketing rights, customer list. These are all examples of intangible assets. Marketing rights, customer list. All right, so we won't waste my time. Now let's go to the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
If the intangible asset is internally generated,
Okay.
now we are shifting our focus to internally generated intangible assets. Right. Now, if it is internally generated, there are two phases. It is the research phase and then development phase. And development phase. Now, let me bring it a bit higher because the research phase is not so detailed. Research phase. The standard says that all research costs are to be expensed. That is what the standard says.
Sure.
So we should remember this. Research
Mm-hmm.
phase, charge all research costs to expense.
Okay.
All. Because the entity would have to research into that particular intangible asset, say a computer software. They would first have to research before they develop it. Every cost incurred at the research phase is expensed.
Okay.
The next is the development phase. Here we capitalize
Mm-hmm.
if certain criteria are met.
Sure.
What are they? So development phase, capitalize if all these criteria are met. If all criteria are met. What are these? One, technical feasibility of completion. We are now developing what we found out from the research phase
Sure.
to actually get the intangible asset, say a computer software. There should be technical feasibility of completion. It's not as if
Okay.
we will start and then along the line we will discard it. No, there should be that feasibility of completion before we can capitalize the cost at development. The next is we should have the intention to complete. Intention to complete. we should have the ability, or there should be the ability to use or sell. All right.
Mm-hmm.
There should be adequate technical, financial, and other resources to complete. It is probable. There should be the probability that future economic benefits will flow to the entity. So there should be probable future economic benefits. And then the expenditure must be measured reliably. So expenditure measured reliably. Good. Research phase, we should charge all costs to expense. Development phase, we capitalize. Now, after we have met all these criteria, all the costs we will incur at this phase is what we will accumulate and show as the value of that intangible asset on our statement of financial position. But
Okay.
before we capitalize any cost at the development phase, we should
Mm-hmm.
meet all, not some, all of these criteria. There should be the physical feasibility of completion. We should have the intention to complete it. Now, when we have completed it, there should be an ability to use or sell that particular thing. And we should have adequate technical, financial, and other resources necessary to complete the project. It is an asset. So, of course,
Yeah.
there should be that probability that future economic benefit will flow to the entity. And then the expenditure we incur at the development phase must be reliably measured. If all these criteria are met, then we capitalize the cost at the development phase and show that as the value or the cost of the intangible in a
Assets.
statement of financial position. Yeah. So that would be the cost
Okay.
of the intangible asset. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if there's something we should note here,
Mm-hmm.
if we can't separate the research phase from the development phase, we treat the whole thing as the research phase.
Okay.
So, treat all costs as research phase if we can't separate the research phase from the development phase. Right. So there's a scenario which says that there's an entity is, or entity has an intangible asset, but the situation is said that the research phase cannot be separated from the development phase. Advise the entity on what they should do or on the treatment of the cost. Because we can't separate them, we will just treat all costs as research phase where we will expense all of them.
Sure.
But if we can separate the two, fine. We expense all the research, and then before we can capitalize any cost at the development phase, we must meet
This is the
all these
criteria.
Yeah, the criteria. If they are met, fine, we capitalize.
Okay.
All right.
So even if one is out, you can't capitalize.
No, they said all. If all are met.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if everything is met, fine, we capitalize.
Okay.
All right. Now, uh, what about the measurement? So let's come to measurement. Measurement. We have the initial measurement and subsequent. Initially, all intangible assets are measured at cost. At cost. Straightforward. Subsequent. We have two models. The first is the cost model, and the two is a revaluation model. So we discuss cost model. Like we discussed under IAS 16, where we said whatever model you adopt should be used for the whole class.
Yeah.
The same thing here. An entity must choose either the cost model or the revaluation model for each class of intangible assets. So you have the choice to choose between these models for each class of your intangible assets. If it is the cost model, after initial recognition, intangible assets should be carried at cost less accumulated amortization and impairment losses. Same as under IAS 16.
Sure.
So it is cost less where are you? There's the cost less amortization, which is the depreciation for intangible assets, and impairment losses. Good. So this is all for the cost model. Revaluation model. You carry intangible assets at a revalued amount based on the fair value,
Okay.
less any subsequent amortization and impairment losses. So revaluation model, you carry it at the fair value, less subsequent amortization and impairment losses. But you should only use the revaluation model if the fair value can be determined.
Okay.
So
So,
use the fair value model if fair value can be determined by reference to an active market.
Sure.
By reference to an active market. Right. So I think fair valuation is, I think, IFRS 13 or something, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
13.
Yeah. So
13. Yeah.
we will look at that later. We can
Okay.
only use the fair value model if we can determine the fair value of the intangible by reference to an active market. Now,
Sure.
revaluation increases. So revaluation model will bring out a revaluation increase or a decrease. Revaluation increases are recognized in other comprehensive income and accumulated in revaluation surplus, just like we did for IAS 16.
16.
Yeah, so recognize in other comprehensive income and then accumulate in equity under revaluation surplus. Right. So this is all for the measurement. Let's look at some guidance here for intangible assets with finite useful life.
Okay. So a quick one. So meaning when there is a decrease, we will have to expense it, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Intangible assets with finite useful life. What do we do? So for this one, the cost less residual value should be amortized on a systematic basis over the useful life. Over the useful life. So it's like saying cost minus residual value over the
Useful life.
useful life. Yes.
Yeah.
Then we get our yearly amortization charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's saying an infinite
Did I say
useful
infinite?
life
This is finite.
or finite. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is intangible assets with
Okay.
finite useful life. So
Okay.
we are now coming to look at the one with,
Infinite.
yeah, infinite useful life. So if it is indefinite useful life, what do we do? If it has an indefinite useful life, it should not be amortized. That is the first thing to note.
Okay.
Should not be amortized, but the circumstances that support the indefinite useful life should be reviewed annually.
Okay.
So should not be amortized, only review circumstances that support the indefinite useful life. So this is it. Because we don't amortize, what do? We test for impairment. So test for impairment annually in accordance with IAS 36. IAS 36. And then the other time I think we discussed this, and then you have to
Yeah.
compare the carrying amount
The
of the
recoverable.
asset, yes, with the recoverable amount. If the carrying amount is greater than the recoverable amount,
It's impaired.
then the asset is impaired. This one too is the lower of fair value less cost to sell and then value in use. Then you compare the
Is it? So is it the lower or the higher?
the lower. If the carrying amount exceeds recoverable amount,
Yeah.
the asset is impaired.
Impaired.
This
Yeah.
carrying amount, sorry, the recoverable amount is
Yeah.
the lower of, is it lower or higher?
I think
Now,
it's higher.
the higher rather.
Yeah, it's the higher.
Oh, okay, fine. So it is the higher of the fair value.
And the value in use.
Yes. So you compare the two and then you pick the higher. You
Mm.
come and compare that up with the carrying amount. And then you have your impairment. So every year you test for impairment if the intangible has an indefinite useful life.
Okay.
So higher of fair value, less cost to sell, and the value in use. Good. We are almost done. Or should I say we are done? Now, disclosure.
Okay.
And then once we are at disclosure, it means we are
Are
done.
drawing our curtains down.
Yes. So, disclosure. What do we disclose? So, what other information do we provide concerning our intangible assets apart from the figures? We disclose the useful life or amortization rates, and this is for the finite ones. Finite life intangible assets. We also disclose the amortization method, accumulated amortization, and impairment losses. We also disclose the basis for determining an indefinite life, right? And then
Okay.
whether the useful lives are definite or indefinite. What am I writing? But I hope you can see the handwriting.
Yeah.
Whether the useful life are definite or indefinite. Good. So we are here at the disclosure. Please, any question?
Oh, I think I'm fine.
All
I'm
right.
fine.
Let me
I
see if
think
I.
because I actually read through before
Uh-huh.
going, it has made things so easy. Yeah.
Yes. Good. And then we should also disclose. The list is not exhaustive. There are more,
Mhm.
but I think I can add this one. The amount of research and development expenditure recognized as expense.
Okay.
So amount of research expenditure recognized as expense. Yeah, there are a whole lot of other disclosure we can have here. And this is all for intangible assets.